Living here in the Philippines, I've discovered that there are five gifts that the Philippines has given to me, or rather has enabled me to give to my young children growing up. And this occurred to me the other day as we were in quarantine at the time from COVID. And my wife and I were walking with our kids, and then we took them to a playground in our subdivision, letting them play and run around. And there's no other kids. And we had this experience in our subdivision in Texas because everybody works, everybody goes to daycare, and there's really very few families around during the day, like let's say on a Tuesday afternoon. Okay, there's really not going to be a lot of people outside, a lot of kids outside, or a Tuesday morning, let's say 9 a.m., 10 a.m. So here in the Philippines, we're in a subdivision, and there's only like maybe one out of every four lots has a house. There's a lot of space, a lot of empty, vacant lots, a lot of green trees, a lot of vegetation, a lot of fruit trees. We just took over a couple of vacant lots and just started growing a garden there. And the maintenance guys that come by and trim the grass, they liked it because they don't have to take care of those lots anymore. Um, just for some vegetables, and the kids just go running through these gardens and these empty streets. And it just occurs to me, the birds are singing, there's beautiful weather 9 days out of 10. It just occurred to me that, I told my wife, we can't give our kids this in the U.S. We can give them something similar, okay, but not this amount of space, not this beautiful weather all year long. Okay, sometimes it does get rainy. Sometimes there are 2 or 3 days in a row that we can't go out and do this. But by far, the majority of the time, we can go out and spend at least part of the day outside in this space that we just don't have access to in the U.S. Okay. Number two, the second gift that the Philippines has given me that's enabled me to give to my two young kids is the standard of living. Now, I became aware of this in 2010, perhaps 2008. I was talking to a guy on one of my trips to the Philippines. I was coming back to Texas. And it turns out he was in the same gate that I was waiting for my flight from Taiwan to Texas. And I had seen him in the Manila airport. And he was surrounded by a big Filipino family. And he told me that he'd married this young Filipina, and he brought her to Houston, which is where he lived. And they lived in an apartment, and he has a good job, but he's not rich, He's got a nice apartment, but he's not going to be able to afford a house, not in a really nice neighborhood, unless his wife is working. Now, if she works, the kids are going to have to go to daycare. The kids are going to have to go to public schools. But if he raises his kids in the Philippines, he can afford a really nice house in a nice subdivision and send the kids to some pretty good private schools. So he talked this over with his wife, and he was really worried about it because his wife started to cry while he was telling her this. And he thought she was crying because she was thinking that he's trying to get rid of her. They'd just been married only a couple of years, and already he's talking about sending her back to the Philippines. But she was crying because that was her prayer. That was her prayer, was for him to allow her to raise their kids back in the Philippines with her family. Because here in Texas, she would be raising the kids as a single at-home mom. And he works all the time, okay? So in the Philippines, she can raise them with her kids. And yeah, he's going to be gone for months at a time, but when he gets vacation, when he gets a week or more off, he'll come and spend time in the Philippines. And that's what they did. So he sends money back, sometimes $1,500, sometimes $2,000 a month, and he lives on the rest and shares an apartment with a friend of his, and they split costs. So he gave me that idea, that in the U.S., an apartment and public school, that same money in the Philippines will give you a really nice rental house in a nice subdivision, safe subdivision, and private school. And that's exactly what we're able to provide our kids here with. A really nice 3-bedroom, 2-story house, twice as big as our house in Texas, I think. Maybe not quite twice as big, but significantly larger than our house in Texas was. And it's a much safer subdivision. Texas, we had no private security. Here we have a lot of private security. Um, I'm able to take my kid to Starbucks all the time. We hang out there. They know my kid by name. There's a playground at the mall called Kidzuna that we play at all the time. My kid loves it. I can't afford things like that in the U.S. on my pension unless I go to back to work, and that's another thing. That's the education. Okay, the schools, when they closed the schools because of the COVID, I was able to get a hold of a teacher who opened up her classroom because she has to go there every once in a while and clean it. And they have meetings and in-service and so forth for the staff. But she opens it up for private tutoring. So my kid can go to school and get one-on-one attention from the teacher at the school. He's 4, so he's adjusting to the school environment, to behaving in a school environment. But he's getting one-on-one attention. Now, how much would that cost in the U.S.? That would be prohibitive. But I can give that to my kid here on my pension. Medical care. Okay, this is number 4. Medical care, the 4th gift that the Philippines has given me, that's enabled me to give to my family, rather. My kid fell. Okay, the house is solid concrete, much better house quality than the house in Texas was, by far. My kid fell on concrete steps, okay, and cut his head a little bit. He needed 2 stitches, okay. So I took him to an emergency room. All right. Now there was a delay because this was during COVID at the time. So there was maybe a 15, perhaps 20-minute delay because they had to test us to make sure we didn't have COVID before they'd allow us into the emergency room. So they tested us, gave us an initial exam outside in a tent. Then we passed the test. They let us into the ER. We got focused attention from a doctor and a nurse, and then I think nurses' assistants, perhaps. Perhaps they were full-fledged nurses. I don't know. Several people, okay? We went to get a CT scan, but my kid just would not sit still. He's 4. He's scared. He doesn't want to go in this tunnel. So he hops out. So we can't give him the CT scan. So we settle for 3 x-rays of his head. No, serious injuries, just 2 stitches. We get some pain medication. We're out of there. All right. We make it home, and I check my watch, and we've been gone almost exactly 3 hours. Oh, and we went through a drive-through on the way and got him ice cream. So he had ice cream on the way home. So there's a little bit of a delay there. A little bit of a delay because of the COVID testing. Drive time, etc. 3 hours from the initial injury until the time we came home after receiving stitches and medication at the ER. Total cost was about $108, I think, when I figured the $118, something like that, when I figured the exchange rate. It was about 6,000 pesos. Totally blew my mind. Just blew my mind. I had to pay $417 in the U.S. just for the insurance, just to have an insurance card so we could have medical care. Okay, that's every month, $417. That's more than 20,000 pesos every month I'm paying. And here we go to the emergency room without any insurance at all, and I'm paying out of pocket, and I have enough money on me at the time. I don't have to go to an ATM or anything. That really blew my mind. And it's a really nice, well-staffed hospital. I can go there at 2 in the morning, and I know they're going to take me in and see me, and I'm going to be able to afford the care that we get. That's a huge relief, okay? My dad was a veteran. He had Medicare and he had Blue Cross. He had private insurance and he had government financed insurance in the U.S. And twice I took him to the emergency room. He was dying of cancer and he's in pain. And he wanted to talk to a doctor. Okay, we waited. We never received an exam. We never talked to a nurse. We were just kept in this waiting room by this attendant that's behind a desk who told us to wait and told us to wait. And you can see staff walking around in the background, but they're not coming out to talk to us. We never talked to a nurse, never talked to a doctor. After 3 hours, my dad told me, let's just go home. I'm tired. I want to go home. So I took him home like at 3 in the morning. We never saw anybody. Okay, that's with insurance in the U.S. Now, that actually happened to me twice with my dad. We went there twice in the middle of the night. I never took him to the hospital where he actually was able to talk to a doctor. I took him to chemo, and we talked to doctors there. I took him to exams that he had scheduled, and he talked to doctors there. But as far as emergency rooms go, this was in Kansas City, okay, not in Texas where I lived, but in Kansas City where he lived. Every time I took him to the emergency room, he never saw a nurse, never saw a doctor. Okay, that's 2 visits, 3 hours, average time each visit. And after he passed away, I was sharing this story to my brother who lives in Kansas City, and he nodded and said, yeah, I did that too. So my brother did that also. So this is my experience of emergency rooms in the U.S., okay? You go there for 3 hours, you don't see a doctor, you don't see a nurse, you don't see anyone, you give up, you come home. Here in the Philippines, it's very different. You get focused attention, you get attention from people who clearly care, who clearly want to help you. That is a huge difference with the United States. In the U.S., it doesn't matter how much equipment the hospital has. If the staff just does not care about you as a human being, you're in very bad circumstance. So here in the Philippines, the hospitals may be less equipped than in the U.S., but I think, as far as my experience goes, the healthcare is above and beyond anything I've had regularly in the U.S. The waiting time is much less. The cost is ridiculously less. So medical care is a huge benefit to living in the Philippines, a huge gift. And the fifth one, the biggest one of all for me, is family, okay? When my wife arrived in the Philippines, I had to explain to her that in the U.S., things are different. Now, there's a lot of really good families. I knew a lot of them in Texas. I knew a lot of really good people. Good people. But in my family, my biological family, there's not a lot of good people. There's a lot of drug addicts. There's a lot of crime. There's a lot of people that are not good people. There's a lot of arrests, history of arrests. And I had to explain that to my wife, that if someone from my family shows up and I'm at work, you can't let them in. And depending on who it is, you might have to call the police. So it's very different in the U.S. So my wife spent a lot of time alone in the U.S. And I spent a lot of time alone in the U.S., living in a big house, 1,300 square feet maybe, something like that. 3-bedroom, 2-bath house by myself. For more than 7 years, I was by myself, alone in that house. In 2009, my parents came and stayed with me for a couple of weeks. Later on that summer, I had a brother who came and stayed with me with his wife and 4 kids. And I really felt, when they were staying with me for, I think, 3 weeks, I really felt that the house was happy. So here in the Philippines, okay, recently, we had 14 people staying in the house. 14 of my wife's family. And when they started leaving, they stayed for a week. When they started leaving and going back home, I cried a little bit. And my wife saw me. And I was sad. And I told her, I want that chaos. I want that. I feel that the house is happy with all that activity, all that chaos, all the noise and missing toilet paper and glasses that are being broke in the kitchen, and we're running out of food. We're running out of a loaf of bread a day, running out of milk, running out of eggs. We had, I think it was 5 teenagers and 3 kids staying in the house with 4 adults. Uh, was that it? 3 kids, one 8-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 2-year-old, 5 teenagers, 6 adults? I think 6 adults at one point. So anyway, it was wonderful. I loved it. And I don't have to worry about anybody stealing anything when they leave. That's one thing that panicked me whenever a family would come to visit me in Texas. I'd have to go through the house. What did they steal? Something's going to be missing. Um, I don't have to worry about them ripping me off. I don't have to worry about leaving money laying around. It's not going to disappear. Nobody's going to take anything. It's amazing. Amazing, the feeling. And this is exactly, part of it's for me, for selfish reasons, because I spent so many years alone in an empty house. Part of it's for me. I want that chaos. But part of it also is for my kids. I want my kids to have that, a big family. I want them to be close to their cousins, to their uncles and aunts. I want them, they call an aunt and uncle Mama and Papa. Mama Delia and Papa Romy, okay? Instead of aunt and uncle, they call them Mama and Papa. And I know that if something happens to me and my wife, that my kids can just shift on over to their house and they'll be okay. They'll be taken care of, you know? That is an amazing gift. So those 5 gifts that I have here in the Philippines that I can't offer my family in the U.S. Space. Just the space, the ability to run with no walls. That's so nice for a 2-year-old. Surrounded by green, surrounded by trees, surrounded by goats, chickens, birds, cats, dogs. Space. Flowers, you know, all year long. Laughing kids running in the sun. That kind of space. Number 2, standard of living. A really nice house in a secure subdivision. I don't have to worry about spooky people walking around checking out the house. Man, I had that in Texas, you know. People would ring the door and try and sell you something, and you can see them trying to look around you to see what's in your house, you know. I don't have that here. The people at Starbucks know my kids' names, you know. The school, quality of school, amazing. Quality of medical care, no worries. No matter what happens, you've got a really well-stocked hospital right around the corner, within 15 minutes. No matter if it's pouring the rain at night, you can get there within 20 minutes to the emergency room and see a doctor within 30 minutes, probably, of an injury. Amazing. A lot of places in the U.S., you just can't get that at all. And family. A lot of people have that in the U.S. I don't. I don't have that in the U.S. There's some family members that I'd love it if they lived with me. But a lot of family members I could never trust. It's sad. But here in the Philippines, it's amazing. Amazing. So I hope you enjoyed that. Take care.